Welcome to the Kingdom Doers Podcast. And today we have Jordan Harvell on the show. Thank you, Jordan, for joining us today. And we're going to let you talk a bit about your business, steady diving, and some other offerings in your business that are going to be really valuable to any Christian entrepreneur, any entrepreneur in general who's watching the show. And you have a really interesting business, so we can't wait to hear about it.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you all so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Jordan, introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. Well, my name is Jordan Harvell, and I originate from South Carolina, but I've been living in Miami for the past about 18 years, and it's warm here. It's hard to move out of here and go somewhere else.
Now, I know we're just starting, but I'm going to go off the rails just a little bit. So this is the first week of college football. My wife knows how exciting of a time. It's the second most wonderful time of the year next to Christmas.
Yes.
You said South Carolina. So are you a Gamecock? Are you a Clemson Tiger? Or are you a Miami Hurricane?
Spurs up, Gamecocks all the way. Come on.
All right.
Oh, yeah, that was a quick answer.
I'm ready for that one. Ready for that one.
Yeah, I'll explain that later. Okay. Those of you who are listening who know, you know. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's dive back in. And so, Jordan, tell us about, what you do in your work.
Sure.
You have a marina business as well as a consulting business. And tell us your journey in business and how did you get here?
Yeah, I moved to Miami. I was 20 years old. I moved here and got this opportunity because I'd already trained in scuba diving and actually special response diving through the National Academy of Police Diving. And so when I moved to Miami, I linked back up with one of the instructors who was a retired police officer with Miami-Dade County. And he called me one night and he's like, hey, you want to go pull a car out of the water, which is what I was trained to do. And I was like, cool. And he's like, I'll pay you $50. And I was like, I'm so in, we show up and it's 10 o'clock at night, so I'm a little nervous because my first recovery and then get into the water and this guy had swerved to miss a duck, whole nother story, but he ends up in the water. I could still remember a Chevy Avalanche. The lights are still on. It's like the perfect scenario to recover a vehicle. I'm like, okay, cool. Easy peasy, pull it out. No big deal, feeling good about myself. Then 3 weeks later, he calls me again. He's like, hey, you want to pull another car out of the water? And I was like, well, this is easy. Pretty sure he's going to pay me again. So, $50, I was, living at large.
Right.
But I went back. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I went back to this same canal. I'm like, this all looks familiar. And he's like, it is. This is where you pulled that other truck out 3 weeks ago. And this is now an F-250, like jacked up. I mean, it's a big vehicle, but I already know the routine, feeling pretty confident. We get that thing out. Turns out he also was swerving to miss a duck. And I'm thinking, like, true story. And I'm like, man, either this neighborhood has a duck problem or I need to take this duck out to lunch because he's making me business. So, but that's the kind of the start. And this guy who's like, just, you could do this as like a business. Michael Gass he's my mentor and retired police officer for 33 years. And he said, you could really make a business out of this, just work with tow companies. And so that's kind of how steady diving started. And we went to, these different tow companies that worked with police departments. And we just said, when you get a car that goes in the water, call us, we'll come pull it out. And that was the start of steady diving. And from there, we've pulled out hundreds of vehicles and worked in insurance fraud cases, earth movers, boats, all kinds of, weapons, bodies, everything you would think that could go in the water on a crime scene way, we've done it. And
amazing.
Through
and
that,
what's
go
that?
ahead.
No, I was gonna say, where's this duck?
Yeah, I feel like I should have hired him, but I feel like that may be one of my earliest regrets as a business owner is not bringing on that kind of talent from the beginning.
Right? Amazing. Wow. That's a really cool story. So,
yeah. And it's been 16 years of doing that, but through those 16 years, we've had to kind of pivot and shift and adjust to the market. And we do way less recoveries. We're like 10% recoveries. And now we're, the 90% is doing marina services. So we went to boat bottom cleaning, topside cleaning. It's less glamorous and cool as pulling stuff out of the water, but it's also a huge market. And there's a lot of need for good people to do it, because that's even less is people that will do it and do a job that truly serves the customer. So that's what we're focused on and enjoying doing now.
That's very cool.
So then you've shifted and you are not just now doing boat services, but you're actually consulting with entrepreneurs and helping them in their business. So tell us about that and how you got into that realm.
So my mission in life is to help people organize the pieces of their life and then inspire them to do something great with that. And the way I found that I could do that I can do that in any job, but the way I found I could do that best was building companies. And so I started steady, figuring my life out then, but then I got into special response diving, which is an international, which is another company that I own. And that just having kind of this captive audience, as you will, I'm like, well, they work for you all day. And so they kind of like, they're going to listen, I think, it was just kind of like this very maybe weird strategy to like try to help people. And so I realized though, that doing that, I really enjoyed the business aspect of building this stuff as much as I loved helping people organize the pieces of their life and inspiring them to do something great. So I kind of had these two directions. I was like, I need to do cool things, build businesses, and do it for myself to be able to speak from experience. And if I can do that and then have these people that work with you, and then I started working with other companies, and now I'm kind of like involuntarily coaching other business owners and leaders. And then I just found, I'm like, well, I have this passion for it, but also just this natural network of people I work with that say, hey, I'm struggling with this, and you seem to have figured that out. And so it sent me on this like really dedicated learning course. I'm like, well, I always want to figure these things out. But then as I started to really hone in on what specifically do I want to help, who do I want to consult, it came down to businesses that don't have great relationships between the leaders, the bosses, and the employees, your team members. And so that I grew really passionate about, and actually met a friend of mine who's the co-founder of Anchor Consulting Group, which is who we do our consulting with. But we really just got passionate about that relationship because it's so damaged. Wow. And oddly enough, we met doing that with in the church. And so we were both in the business and the HR department, and seeing other churches and how just other businesses, just because you're in a church doesn't mean you have those great relationships. And I'm always telling people that's what business is about. Business is about people. So let's focus on the most difficult part of business, which is helping those leaders lead people who have lives, who have families, who have needs, who have creativity, and sometimes have the desire to not perform and need to go to another company. And so that's where we're always trying to help people navigate and do it more. And I like to think of it more as a discipleship way, less of a sit down, let me tell you this, and this, but let's build a relationship over time. Okay. And let's actually, get to know you as the team and see how we can bridge that gap. So that's the main thing. But the other part is the customer experience, because again, business is all about people. So if you can figure out the leaders and the teams together, and then they can collectively figure out how to genuinely, sincerely serve their customer, then I think you just create really great, thriving companies. I know it sounds a little basic, but I think those two right there are one of the keys that I've had to success over 16 years and more, leading other companies.
Yeah, you said that it sounds basic, but it reminds me of the things that sometimes are the most simple concepts are not always the easiest, right? It's like we just get along, right?
Yeah,
Let's just work together.
Just don't scream at each other,
Right?
Be a good person. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, but yeah, you put a bunch of people that are all different personalities together, and you try to get them to focus on a goal to accomplish together, right. And everyone's going to interpret how they see things a different way. And so it's just like in marriage, really, right? In any kind of relationship. It's like you're coming from your own perspectives and your own, different views on things. So that's where it becomes really challenging. But I like what you said about the discipleship part and seeing it as a discipleship relationship. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, and maybe what are some of the challenges with that kind of perspective when you're working with leadership trainings or working with just people in general?
Yeah, I live in Miami, so we're like the ultimate melting pot of America. And so we've got so many different cultures from every part of the world that are all living really close proximity. We don't have a whole lot of like New York, you got like Chinatown and, Little Italy and all this, like people tend to get with their people. Here it's everywhere. And so you get a lot of different cultural upbringings and personalities and ambition. Because you got people that are trying to get their thing done and they can't understand why that person just doesn't get it. An entirely different way of problem solving and creativity. So that's kind of forced me into navigating, you're never just going to figure that stuff out like in the blink of an eye. you've actually got to build a relationship with the person. You've got to get to know who your team is as a leader.
That's good.
And more importantly, you've got to get to know what's going to drive them, motivate them. And I mean, y'all know well enough that it's not always the money, it's not always the benefits, sometimes it's just the fact that you actually care 10% more than the corporate world. And which is why I believe small businesses are the best places to work, because there's people that will actually care. And so when you're building those relationships, especially within your own team, I think that it goes a long way to just find out, I tell people, find out 5 things you can always ask and say, hey, how has that been going in your life? Whether it's a hobby, their kids. I mean, everybody loves to talk about their kids. If they're dating somebody, if they're married, that's kind of a hit or miss, like, oh, we broke up, or like, oh, things are not good, so you got to be careful with that one. But with most everything else, you can find something to connect with them on, and do it when it's not comfortable. Do it when it's not expected. Do it when you're like in the middle of a conversation, like, hey, by the way, you still learning fencing, and everybody else is gonna be like, what are y'all talking about? But that person in the moment is gonna be like, man, they actually are asking about me, and nobody else can answer this question but me. So I'm going to be the one that's going to be elevated and lifted up. And it doesn't always have to be like one-on-ones and just make it. So I say that on the relational discipleship side, but when I'm actually consulting or coaching other people, I want to make it as laid back as possible. In fact, one guy, he was kind of new in his role as an executive, and he's kind of just figuring out his role. And it's like, I'm no longer really doing the work, I'm leading people. And so he wanted to talk, he wanted to chat through some stuff. And I said, all right, well, why don't we meet here, but you need to wear flip-flops. And he's like, oh, okay. I was like, no, like just shorts and flip-flops. Don't get dressed up. I know you're like, that's your new style and everything. But he's like, all right, cool. So he literally showed up, and we went to a restaurant, and he's like, wait, why am I wearing flip-flops? So I was like, I want you to be relaxed. I want you to just don't take your life so seriously. You're an executive now, but it's not that important. And he was kind of like shocked with that. But then through the conversation, he instantly, okay, we're eating a meal. That's why Jesus is always like talking to people over meal. I'm like, it's hard to be mad or, when you're stuffing your face, and there's actually a lot of science behind that. Like when you're chewing,
there is
chewing gum, I always offer people gum if I'm having to deal with staff or something. But anyway, it's those kinds of little things that make people feel comfortable and not feel like, oh, this is so like, we got to make it here, and this has got to be, if I don't get everything now. And I'm like, nah, forget about it. We're going to have the first 2 conversations. I'm not going to charge you for those. We're just I'm going to get to know me. And then later on, if I'm not bringing value to help you as an individual lead better, or your company to move from point A to point B, then just don't pay me. Like, I would much rather see you thrive as an individual than to make the money. Now, that's easy for, I know every consultant who's doing this professionally is like, you're an idiot, No, listen, I have other businesses that can pay the bills. So I get that you need to, like, no, we're charging right now. But you got to build the relationship in a way that they're going to feel comfortable, that you're not pushing something, you're not selling something. But that also goes with the leader to their employees. I'm not just trying to sell you something. I genuinely want you to be a better human being. Everybody wins, and you included. It's a hard thing to teach people, but it really does have to become like a life effort as a leader to be able to do that.
Yeah. I like that what you said, with the getting to know each other and breaking bread, basically, right? Like having meals with each other and everything. And it is what Jesus did. And he did emphasize relational value on everything he was doing, right? There was relationship happening. And I love the passage about him, leaving the 99 for that one. That was, the sheep that's off on its own, and he goes and gets that sheep. And it's like his eyes are always focused on us. He knows each and every one of us. And if we lead in that way, how powerful that can be when people feel seen. And it sounds like that's what you really are intending to do. And that's so Christ-like. And I admire that. I think that's something that we can all learn from.
Not just that, but you gave a super practical example. You said just to have your 4 or 5 questions that you ask each person. And I'll say this, I get the privilege to pastor at a church, and you don't know everyone's name and everyone's this and everyone's that all the time. But for every person I have built, well, wait a second, am I letting my secret out? I have my go-to questions for everyone. Like, hey, what's going on with this or that? And, if I could just loop it in, and it allows me every week to speak to everybody personally, because I have my go-to questions. And when you said that, I was like, it's so simple, but it is such a big key thing. So thanks for just, dropping that on our audience.
Yeah. And I want to say something else there's two other principles I feel like where Jesus did most of his teaching. What were they constantly doing, Jesus and the disciples? Walking from town to town.
Yeah.
And like, I cannot imagine the weird conversations. I like to imagine there's a lot of weird conversations that Jesus had, because he's like, Jesus is 30 something and the disciples are like 15 to 20-year-olds, so I'm like, they're probably like, what about this, like once they kind of figure out who Jesus is. But there's a lot of walking, and I'll actually have meetings with some of my team. I'm like, it's a walking meeting, because there's a lot of science behind, your brain is releasing some endorphins. When endorphins are released, it turns on every learning center in the brain. So let's take advantage of my team having to learn a lesson, learn something, or get strategic thinking for the future. But that's one principle. And I was also going to say, the whole leaving the 99 to get the one. So shepherds actually back then, they would actually break the leg of the sheep that ran away, which not many people know this, but they would break the leg of the sheep, and then they would have to carry. And you've seen these pictures of the shepherd carrying the lamb, because they would reset the leg. And while it healed, the lamb is doing nothing but bonding with the shepherd the entire time. And so let's say it takes the lamb, 2 to 4 months to heal. That shepherd has to physically carry that lamb everywhere, but he's bonding. Guess what that lamb's going to do when he gets down? He's not going to be like,
with them,
peace, I'm out of here. I'm going to try and make a break for the greener pastures. He's like, I'm never leaving this guy's side, because they've cared for me, literally carried me from place to place. And I like that principle because it's such a need, I think, sometimes with certain team members. Sometimes don't hear me say I'm like, kneecapping some people in my team and be like, hey, I'm going to carry you around. But let's be very clear. But I do believe that there is a place for limiting what they're able to do, but not just handing them off to someone else. But the leader needs to step in and say, I'm not only going to do part of your job or do part of whatever needs to happen, or maybe have to just manage you a little bit closer, but do it in a way that builds the relationship. Don't just feel like we're here for the work, but actually take that time to say, I'm here for the communication. I'm here for the seeing what else is going on in your life, trying to identify if there's a deeper issue that is causing some of this. And when you're able to do that, that's where I think you build those bonds that they're like, why would I leave? Why would I give me another person, another leader who's going to care for me as much as this person has? Because they could have just been like, get out of here. You're done. You know what? I got 100 other people that I can take care of. I don't need you.
Yeah.
But when you can take that intentionality, it bleeds through big time in a way that leaves a good stain on the people that you serve as when you're leading.
Yeah. That image of the shepherd breaking the sheep's leg and then carrying it on his shoulders to bond with him. Revelation 3:19, Jesus says, those that I love, I rebuke and I chasten. And I see that. And it's just like, it's not out of a place of anger, but it's out of love.
Out of love. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I love that. And I've seen those pictures with the sheep over the shoulders. I never knew what that meant. So you taught me something today. It's such a great analogy for leadership and what you're saying, because most people are expected to just be fired and let go and, okay, on to your next thing. But when you take that time to build that relationship, to bond, to nurture, and to build up that person again, like, wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Now, in your business, you aren't just consulting in those relationships, but you also help people with their curb appeal and kind of their customer service and all that. Tell us a bit more about that side of your consulting business as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think we've all been to a restaurant or we've been to a store, and you like kind of walk in. I don't know if they actually realize, like, I don't work here. I'm an actual customer. I have money and I need your services. Like you go into these places and you just kind of like walk around, and I'm like intentionally making eye contact with people. And I'm just like, is anybody going to do anything? And sometimes, you go to these places, you just hear a phone ringing. Sometimes that's like a pet peeve. And I'm like, man, maybe I was just raised different. Maybe I was taught different. And I worked in different stores in retail. I've worked in places where if the phone's ringing, that's business. You got to serve your customer. You got to do that. And so I just started kind of noticing this over the past maybe 5-6 years, like big time. And I've always noticed in my own businesses, I'm like very customer service oriented, kind of with naturally. But now I'm starting to notice these other companies, what an eyesore that is. I don't think they realize what a breakdown they're having just in the way that individual communicated, in the music that they're playing, in the temperature of the air conditioner. I don't think people realize that when somebody walks in, they're going to make or break. They're doing business with you forever. If you've never read the book, The $6,000 Egg, it's really great. And it's all about the whole kind of this customer service mindset. But I'm not going to spoil the book for you, but it's more or less these people are not treated well at a restaurant and they end up not doing business with this restaurant, but they did a lot of business, like a lot of money annually, all because somebody didn't want to just think with their brain and say, yeah, I can do that. And it wasn't a weird request. It was just a simple request with the food and the menu. And anyway, they're like, we're not going to do that. And nothing you say can change our mind.
$6,000 egg.
$6,000 egg. It's a great book. If you are in any kind of customer centered business, which everybody listening is, by the way, if you don't know that, you are. If you're in a customer centered business, then you should definitely read it, because what you start to realize is, man, it's the little things that sometimes we take a hard stance on as business owners, especially, I think is even more than the staff. But when we take a stance on something and we don't budge in like, oh, well, this is peak efficiency and I've got my numbers and my details perfect, that we just forget about everything else. We forget that, hey, it's cold in here and you work here all day and you're wearing a jacket, but that person just came in and it's 87 degrees outside. It's too cold for them. You ever been to a movie theater and you're freezing? Why are movie theaters freezing? Everybody knows I'm going to be there for 2 hours. Right. You know, and then you tell me don't bring a jacket because you're hiding candy. That's none of your business. Of course I'm hiding candy. Okay. But I am going to go and I'm going to judge whether even we all like the bathrooms and stuff, that kind of stuff. So when I'm looking at a business and I'm wanting to help them on that aspect, I'm looking just really genuinely kind of think of secret shopping. I can walk in and say, here's my experience. What I'm focusing on the most, like 25% visual, actual curb appeal. And then the other 75% is almost every word that an employee or a server or somebody who's helping me, how they talk to me. And then this talk to their coworkers, the same, they should be talking the same they're talking to their customers. My favorite right now is to go into a place and people think that like, oh yeah, you can't hear me. I know you're 10 feet away, but I'm talking to my coworker and I'm going to speak in a much different way than I would speak to you. And I'm going to put on the face. And then what does that make the customer feel? Yeah. Are you being real with me? Or are you just putting on the face because you want to sell something?
Right.
It's amazing how many people are turned off from a business because that one team member was just like, listen, I'll curse over here with my coworkers and it's fine. Oh, and there's two people that I'm talking to. Yeah. And I heard both of them. So I'd rather talk to someone who has my best, and then people can see a salesman. They can feel the fakeness and they know. So helping teams do that. And it's more of just like being able to point it out. And it's like kind of what step one is, are you self-aware? Most people in that, I'm going to say demographic, the age, the generation, that they're like, whatever, I'm not going to work at this job forever. Well, treat it as if you're going to work in that job forever. Treat it as if you're going to own that job one day, because or the company, because that's going to change how you interact with people. When you can do that on the individual level, then the whole company's going to start to thrive. And I think we're seeing a major shift. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine today. They took their car in for service at an Acura. The car used to go in for service because they lease it, and they would get the outside washed and they would get it interior vacuumed. And they're like, last time they didn't wash the outside, but they vacuumed the inside. And then they went this time and they're like, we know this just got bought out by a bigger company. They didn't do anything. No wash, no vacuum. That is affecting how they're going to think about doing business with that dealership in the future. It's like, well, this is what I expect because that's what you built, but then you sold out to somebody else and they're not maintaining the same level. And I'm seeing a shift in the marketplace, not just in Miami, but across the country, that a lot of other people are just starting to say, I'm kind of just over not being treated like, I don't want to be treated like a transaction. I don't want to be treated like, well, it's a numbers game and we've got 100 other people here who's going to leave this flock for the 99. Yeah. And I think that's the case. If you can care for people enough, don't go break your customers' legs. Okay. But carry them on your shoulders.
Do not do this at home.
Don't do that. But I think that's something on the customer service side that is, that's one example and maybe two examples of what people are missing. But when the leaders are so detached, and that's really where we're finding these problems in these companies, is the leaders are so detached from the day-to-day. They don't obsess of like, hey, by the way, you represent my name and reputation. What does Proverbs say? That's way more valuable than pretty much all the treasures, the physical, the rubies, the gold. Your reputation, your name is really, really important.
It's true.
So hold on to that, because that represents your character. That represents what people are going to think about you down the road. What represents what people are going to think about your business.
Mhm.
And I don't think people take that seriously enough, because like, oh, I have so many other things I need to work on. Take a break from the other thing.
Yeah.
Spend 2 days just listening to your staff talk, and you'll be like, I think I got my work cut out for me, you know? And it's a game changer, and you may not realize it, but that could really represent tens of thousands of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the industry that you're in.
That's so true. In the day when I was in customer service, like before social media and all this, they used to say for every customer that's satisfied, they'll tell 2 more people. Do you remember that? And then they tell 2 more people. Well, now it's like thousands of people at once, right? With the review. Also, it affects even more negatively, more than ever, if you're having poor customer service. Your bottom line.
And people are so excited to share on Google. They're like, worst place ever. Don't ever do business with them. And then there's the people that are out there that are just going to do that because they're mean. And it's like, listen, you know, that was a bad day, or that was a misunderstanding. And they're just like, I'm going to trash your business. Well, that's a great opportunity to really show your true colors as a leader, because you can go into as a business and say, answer that person's negative feedback and be like, we're sorry you had a bad experience. What can we do to make this right? Lose $100. Give that person free whatever, give them an amazing experience, even if it's just to be like, oh, cool, I got my free food and I left. But at least you can say, we're happy to do anything we can. And then what is the person reading that going to do? They're going to say, not only did they get a bad review, they immediately responded to it. And there's 700 other positive reviews. You know, why am I going to listen to this one guy? Obviously, these people have integrity, you know, so it's
so true. That's great. Great tip.
Let's get you out of here on this question. You wear a couple different hats with diving and duck dodging and, you know, boat cleaning. And then, of course, you wear the consulting hat and, you know, helping people in that arena. Out of the audience who's listening to you today, who should be reaching out to you? Who should be contacting you? And then how do they find you?
I think the people that would benefit from a conversation with me, and I'll just put it like that, I think the people that would benefit the most are those that are in I would say the 5 to 10 year range of leading a business, if they're business owners, because they're going to probably be hitting some of those roadblocks and challenges as they're growing, and that are saying, I can't move my team to where it needs to be. That's number one. And then the people who feel like they're doing really well. Honestly, I think those are the ones that especially if you're a brick and mortar store and you are, say, retail, or you have a physical customer experience, even virtual customer experience, but mainly the physical customer experience, because when you start feeling a little more comfortable and your mind is shifted over, it's good to have people come in like us to be able to say, hey, here's what we're seeing on the customer experience that you may not be noticing. It's better to catch it now before it becomes a problem. And it's a way to keep yourself sharp and moving as a business, as opposed, don't let it get bad. You know, it's good to have regular checkups just to get somebody else's perspective. So those are those type of leaders that are listening in your audience and helping people organize their lives and hopefully be able to inspire them to do something great with it.
And then, of course, there's also SETIdiving.com. They can see your marina business, and we'll put that down below as well.
Thank you, Jordan, for sharing everything you've shared, and really important leadership tips on how to be more of a discipleship type of leader, as well as how customer service can really help your bottom line, and all the other tidbits that you shared were really awesome.
Well, thank y'all. No, this is great. Thank y'all so much for having me here.